Welcome to Classic Storytime Hub. Tonight, we bring you a reimagined retelling of The Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe, a Gothic masterpiece reshaped into a chilling narrative crafted for you. It was a day stripped of life, a heavy, airless autumn afternoon when the skies sagged low with suffocating clouds. Alone on horseback, I wandered through a barren stretch of land until, as twilight crept across the horizon, the House of Usher revealed itself before me. From the very first glimpse, a chill seized my spirit. It was not the kind of melancholy that poetry redeems with beauty, but a suffocating gloom that pressed upon the soul like a weight too great to bear. I studied the scene, the house itself, its walls bleak and lifeless, the windows hollow and staring like vacant eyes, the withered sedges clinging to the earth, the pale skeletal remains of trees long dead. The sight filled me with a despair so profound it reminded me of the bitter awakening from an opium dream, the cruel return to reality when the veil of illusion is torn away. There was no grandeur here, no sublime terror to inspire awe, only a sickening emptiness, a coldness that gnawed at the heart. I asked myself what it was that so unstrung my nerves, but no answer came. The mystery was beyond reason, as though the house itself radiated a power that defied understanding. In restless thought, I turned my horse toward the edge of a black, motionless tarn beside the dwelling. There, in its glassy surface, I saw the house reflected, distorted, inverted, the gray sedges, the ghastly tree trunks, the hollow windows staring back at me. And the sight struck me with a shudder deeper than before, as though the reflection revealed not just the house, but its very soul. Despite the oppressive air of the mansion, I resolved to remain there for several weeks. Its master, Roderick Usher, had once been my closest companion in youth, though many years had passed since we last met. Recently, a letter had reached me, frantic, desperate, and impossible to ignore. In it, Roderick spoke of a failing body, a tormented mind, and a desperate need for the comfort of my presence. He called me his truest and perhaps only friend. The urgency of his words left me no choice but to answer his summons. Though we had shared boyhood days, I realized how little I truly knew of him. Even then, his nature had been cloaked in secrecy, his reserve almost impenetrable. What I did know was that the Usher family, ancient and distinguished, had long been marked by a strange sensitivity of spirit. Across generations, this temperament had given rise to works of haunting art, quiet acts of generosity, and an almost obsessive devotion to the complexities of music. Yet there was another, darker truth. The Usher line had never branched. No cousins, no distant kin, only a single unbroken descent from parent to child, century after century. This unyielding inheritance seemed to fuse the family with the house itself, until the name House of Usher no longer meant merely the crumbling mansion or the bloodline within, but both together, the single inseparable entity in the minds of those who spoke it. My childish experiment, staring into the black waters of the tarn, had only deepened the strange unease that first seized me. I knew well enough that fear feeds upon itself, yet the awareness of my growing superstition only quickened its hold. Such is the cruel law of terror. The more we resist it, the faster it spreads. When I lifted my gaze from the reflection to the house itself, a wild thought struck me, absurd yet impossible to dismiss. It seemed as though the mansion and its grounds were wrapped in their own atmosphere, a heavy vapor that did not belong to the heavens above, but it seeped upward from the rotting trees, the gray stone walls, and the lifeless tarn. A dull, poisonous mist, sluggish, faint, and leaden, clung to the estate like a shroud. Shaking off what I told myself must be a dream, I studied the building more closely. Its age was unmistakable. The walls were stained by centuries, their surfaces veiled in delicate webs of fungus that hung from the eaves like tattered lace. Yet, strangely, the structure itself had not collapsed. The stones, though crumbling in isolation, still held together with unnerving precision, like ancient woodwork left to rot in a forgotten vault, untouched by air or time. And then I saw it, a fissure, so fine it might escape the casual eye, running from the roof down the front wall in a jagged line until it vanished into the dark waters below. A scar upon the house, subtle but ominous, as though the mansion itself bore a wound that could never heal. Crossing the narrow causeway, I reached the house at last. A silent servant took my horse, and I stepped beneath the looming Gothic archway. Another valet, moving with a stealth that unsettled me, guided me wordlessly through a maze of dark, twisting corridors. Every detail along the way seemed to deepen the unease already gnawing at me. The carved ceilings, the heavy tapestries, the blackened floors, even the rattling trophies of arms, all were things I had seen before in other ancient halls. Yet here the familiar became strange, as though ordinary objects had been infused with some hidden menace. On a staircase, I crossed paths with the family physician. His face struck me with its odd mixture of sly cunning and troubled confusion. He greeted me nervously, then hurried on without pause. At last, the valet opened a door and ushered me into the chamber of his master. The room was vast, its ceiling soaring into shadow. Narrow pointed windows pierced the walls, so high above the floor that they seemed unreachable. Through their latticed panes, a dim crimson light filtered in, illuminating only the nearest objects, while the far corners of the chamber remained swallowed in darkness. Heavy draperies clung to the walls. The furniture was abundant yet worn, antique yet comfortless. Books and musical instruments lay scattered about, but none of them brought life to the place. Instead, the air itself seemed thick with sorrow, a stern, unyielding gloom that pressed down upon everything, leaving no corner untouched. As I entered, Roderick Usher rose from the sofa where he had been lying, and greeted me with a sudden warmth that, at first, seemed almost forced, the exaggerated courtesy of a weary man clinging to formality. Yet, a single look at his face convinced me of his sincerity. We sat together in silence for a moment, and I studied him with a mixture of pity and dread. Never had I seen a man so utterly transformed in so short a time. It was difficult to reconcile the pale, spectral figure before me with the companion of my boyhood. His features had always been striking, but now they were grotesquely heightened. His skin was bloodless, cadaverous. His eyes, unnaturally large, liquid, and luminous, burned with a brilliance that unsettled me. His lips, thin and colorless, still curved with an almost unnatural beauty. His nose, finely shaped yet broad at the nostrils, and his delicate chin, lacking firmness, hinted at weakness of will. His hair, soft as gossamer, had grown wild and unkempt, floating about his face like a ghostly halo. The effect was inhuman, as though I looked not upon a man, but upon some strange, fragile being caught between life and shadow. Even his manner betrayed a disturbing inconsistency. He shifted between bursts of restless energy and sudden lapses into gloom. His voice, too, was unstable, trembling and uncertain one moment, then dropping into a slow, heavy cadence, each word deliberate, hollow, and unnervingly precise. It was the voice of a man consumed by nervous agitation, a soul teetering on the edge of collapse. It was then that Usher spoke of the true reason for my visit, his desperate need for companionship, and the fragile hope that my presence might ease his suffering. He described, at length, the strange malady that consumed him. It was, he claimed, a family curse, a constitutional weakness for which he saw no cure. He dismissed it, almost in the same breath, as a mere nervous disorder that would soon pass. Yet the symptoms he revealed were anything but ordinary. His senses had become unbearably acute. Only the blandest food could he endure. Only certain fabrics could touch his skin. The fragrance of flowers suffocated him. Even the faintest light seared his eyes. And of all sounds, only the trembling notes of stringed instruments did not fill him with dread. But worse than these afflictions was the terror that ruled him. "I shall perish," he whispered. "I must perish in this miserable folly. Not by danger itself, but by the terror of it. I shudder at the smallest event, fearing not what it is, but what it might awaken in me. Sooner or later, I will lose both reason and life in a final struggle with that grim spectre, fear." As he spoke, I began to glimpse another shadow upon his mind. In broken hints and half-spoken confessions, he revealed a superstition that bound him to the house itself. For years he had not left its walls, convinced that the mansion exerted a sinister influence over him. The gray stones, the ancient turrets, the black waters of the tarn, all, he believed, had seeped into his spirit, until the house and his own soul were one and the same. At last, Usher confessed, though with great reluctance, that much of his torment sprang from a more tangible source, the long and relentless illness of his sister, Lady Madeline. She was his only companion, his last living relative, and her approaching death would leave him utterly alone, the final heir of the Usher name. As he spoke, she appeared. Slowly, silently, she drifted across a distant part of the chamber. She did not see me, nor acknowledge my presence, and vanished through a doorway without a word. Yet her passing struck me with a strange and dreadful astonishment, a chill I could not explain. When the door closed behind her, I turned instinctively toward her brother. His face was buried in his hands, and through his pale, wasted fingers I saw tears fall. Bitter, passionate tears that revealed the depth of his despair. Her illness, I soon learned, had long baffled her physicians. A wasting of the body, a deadening of the spirit, and strange, fleeting seizures that left her in a trance-like state. Until now, she had resisted the weight of her malady, refusing to confine herself to bed. But on the very evening of my arrival, she had finally yielded to its crushing power. Usher told me, with a grief that shook him to the core, that the glimpse I had caught of her would likely be my last. While she lived, I would see her no more.
In the days that followed, her name was never spoken between us. I devoted myself to easing my friend's sorrow. We painted together, we read aloud, or I listened in uneasy silence as he conjured wild, mournful improvisations from his guitar. Yet the closer I drew to him, the more I realized the futility of my efforts. His mind radiated darkness, as if gloom itself were not a passing shadow, but a permanent force within him, a poison that seeped into every thought, every perception, every corner of his world.
I will forever carry the memory of those solemn hours spent in the company of Roderick Usher. Yet no words can fully capture the strange nature of the pursuits into which he drew me. Everything he touched was colored by a fevered imagination, a mind burning with unhealthy brilliance. His long improvised dirges still echo in my ears, mournful strains that seemed less like music than the voice of despair itself. I recall with particular unease his grotesque distortion of a familiar waltz by von Weber, twisted into something wild and unrecognizable. His paintings, too, were unlike anything I had ever seen. They grew slowly under his hand, stroke by stroke, into vague and haunting visions that chilled me precisely because I could not explain why they did. Their stark simplicity, their naked abstraction, commanded attention and filled me with awe. If ever a man painted not an image but an idea, that man was Roderick Usher. And in those days, surrounded by his gloom, the effect of his art was overwhelming, a terror more profound than any I had felt before. One of his visions remains etched in my mind. A small canvas, yet filled with dread. It depicted the interior of a vast, rectangular vault buried deep beneath the earth. The walls were smooth, white, and featureless, stretching endlessly into shadow. No door, no passage, no escape. And yet, though no torch or lamp was shown, the entire space was flooded with a ghastly light, a brilliance unnatural, oppressive, and wrong.
Usher's illness had twisted even his relationship with music. All sounds tormented him, save for the trembling voice of stringed instruments. Upon his guitar, he would conjure strange improvisations, wild and fevered, as though each note were drawn from the very edge of madness. Often, he accompanied these melodies with verses of his own invention, rhymes that seemed to rise unbidden from the depths of his troubled spirit. One of these rhapsodies remains etched in my memory. It was called The Haunted Palace. As he performed it, I felt for the first time that he was fully aware of his own unraveling, that he recognized the slow collapse of his reason. The song spoke of a radiant palace, once glorious, filled with harmony and light. Its windows shone like eyes, its halls echoed with music, and a noble king ruled within, surrounded by beauty and wisdom. But then came the invaders, shadowed figures draped in sorrow. They seized the palace, and its splendor withered into ruin. The windows glowed red, the music turned discordant, and grotesque shapes wandered its halls. From its doors poured a hideous procession, laughing with a hollow mirth that knew no joy. It was impossible not to hear in these verses the reflection of Usher himself, a mind once noble and brilliant, now besieged by darkness, its harmony broken, its throne of reason tottering.
From the verses of The Haunted Palace, our conversation drifted into darker speculations. Usher revealed a belief he clung to with unnerving conviction. He spoke of the sentience of all living things, not only plants, but, in his fevered imagination, even the lifeless stones of the earth. In his mind, the House of Usher itself was alive. Its gray walls, its creeping fungi, the rotting trees that surrounded it, and the black tarn that mirrored it, all had, through centuries of stillness, fused into a single conscious presence. He claimed that this presence had condensed an atmosphere of its own, a subtle but terrible influence that had shaped the fate of his family for generations. And now, he said, it had shaped him into the man I saw before me, frail, haunted, and enslaved by the very house that bore his name. Our studies together reflected this obsession. The books he devoured were steeped in mysticism and phantasm. Swedenborg's Heaven and Hell, Holberg's Subterranean Voyage of Nicholas Klim, Tieck's Journey into the Blue Distance, Campanella's City of the Sun. He lingered over Machiavelli's Belphegor, the occult writings of Flood and Della Chambre, and the grim Directorium Inquisitorium of Emeric de Gironne. But his greatest fascination lay with a rare, forgotten manual of the Church, Vigiliae Motorum Secundum Coram Ecclesiae Maguntinae. Over its pages he would brood for hours, as though the dead themselves whispered to him through its Gothic script. I could not help but think of the strange rituals that had so consumed Usher's mind when, one evening, he told me abruptly that his sister, Lady Madeline, was dead. His voice was flat, almost mechanical, as he explained his intention. Her body would not be buried at once, but kept for a fortnight in one of the vaults deep within the mansion. The reasons he gave were practical enough: the unusual nature of her illness, the intrusive curiosity of her physicians, and the exposed position of the family burial ground. I remembered the sinister expression of the doctor I had met upon my arrival, and I found no strength to oppose what seemed, at worst, a grim but harmless precaution. At Usher's request, I aided him in the dreadful task. Together and alone, we carried the coffin into the bowels of the house. The vault we entered had not been opened for generations. Our torches sputtered in the suffocating air, revealing a chamber small, damp, and utterly lightless. It lay directly beneath the wing of the house where I myself slept. The place bore the marks of a darker history. In ancient times, it had served as a dungeon, later as a storehouse for gunpowder. Copper lined the floors and the arched passage that led us there, and the massive iron door was sheathed the same way. When it swung shut, its immense weight shrieked against the hinges with a sound so sharp, so final, that it seemed less the closing of a door than the sealing of a fate. We laid our sorrowful burden upon the trestles in that chamber of horror. For a moment we loosened the coffin lid and looked upon her face. Only then did I notice the striking resemblance between brother and sister. Usher, reading my thoughts, whispered that they had been twins, bound by a bond so deep, so mysterious, that even he could scarcely explain it. We did not linger, for though she lay in death, there was something in her appearance that filled us with awe. The strange illness that had claimed her had left behind a cruel mockery of life, a faint blush upon her cheeks, a lingering smile upon her lips. It was the kind of smile that makes death more terrible than silence. We sealed the coffin, locked the iron door, and climbed back into the upper halls of the house, which seemed scarcely less oppressive than the vault below. Days of grief followed, and with them came a dreadful change in Usher. His usual habits vanished. He abandoned all occupation, wandering aimlessly from room to room with restless, uneven steps. His pallor deepened to a ghastly shade, and the strange light that once burned in his eyes was gone.
His voice, once shifting between energy and gloom, now trembled constantly with the quaver of fear. At times I thought he struggled to confess some secret too terrible to speak. At others I believed his mind had surrendered entirely to madness. For hours I would find him standing motionless, staring into nothing, as though listening to sounds only he could hear. His terror infected me. Slowly, insidiously, I felt the weight of his superstitions pressing upon my own spirit, until I too began to sense the house itself breathing its dreadful influence into us both.
On the 7th or 8th night after Lady Madeline's entombment, I felt the full weight of the house's influence. Sleep would not come. The hours dragged endlessly, and though I tried to reason away my unease, the effort was useless. The chamber itself seemed alive with menace. The tattered drapery swayed and rustled in the rising storm. Shadows writhed across the walls, and every detail of the room pressed upon me with a suffocating gloom. A tremor seized my body, and soon a nameless dread sat heavy upon my chest, like an unseen weight. I rose from the bed, gasping, and strained my ears into the darkness. Through the pauses of the storm, faint, indefinite sounds reached me. Distant, irregular, and untraceable. Horror gripped me. Certain I would not sleep again, I hastily dressed and began pacing the room in a desperate attempt to shake off the terror. It was then I heard a light step on the staircase outside. I knew it instantly. Usher. A moment later he tapped gently at my door and entered, carrying a lamp. His face was as pale as ever, but in his eyes burned a wild, unnatural gleam. His whole manner quivered with restrained hysteria. The sight appalled me, yet I welcomed his presence. Anything was better than the solitude that had nearly broken me. "You have not seen it," he said abruptly, after a silence that seemed to stretch into eternity. "You have not seen it? But wait, you shall." He shaded the lamp, strode to the window, and flung it open. The storm burst in with such force it nearly swept us from our feet. The night was terrible, yet strangely beautiful. The wind shifted violently, as though a whirlwind had gathered its strength around the house. The clouds hung so low they seemed to crush the turrets, yet we could see their furious motion, colliding and racing across the sky. No moon, no stars, no lightning, only the vast, heaving masses of vapor glowing with an unnatural light. A faint, luminous exhalation clung to the house, wrapping it in a spectral shroud. "Do not look," I cried, shuddering, as I pulled Usher away from the window and forced him gently into a chair. "These strange lights, these shifting clouds, they are nothing more than natural phenomena, tricks of the storm or vapors rising from the tarn. Let us close the casement. The night air is dangerous to you. Here is one of your favorite romances. I will read, and you shall listen. Together, we will endure this dreadful night." The book I seized was The Mad Tryst of Sir Lancelot Canning. I had called it a favorite of Usher's in bitter jest, for in truth its crude and clumsy style could never have appealed to his refined imagination. Yet it was the only volume at hand, and I clung to the hope that even its absurdities might distract him from his fevered state. At first, I thought my plan had worked. Usher leaned forward, his eyes wide, his face alive with a strange, strained intensity, as though he drank in every word. I came to the passage where the hero, Ethelred, denied entry by a stubborn hermit, resolves to break down the door. The tale described how, emboldened by wine and driven by the storm, he raised his mace and struck the planks with such force that the dry, hollow timbers cracked and splintered, their sound echoing through the forest. And as I read those words aloud, a chill ran through me, for in that very moment, from somewhere deep within the house, there came a sound, a hollow, reverberating crack, as though the tale itself had leapt from the page into the walls around us. As I finished the sentence, I froze. For a moment I thought my imagination had betrayed me, yet I could not deny what I had heard. From somewhere deep within the house came a faint, muffled sound. It was distant, stifled, but unmistakable, the dull echo of cracking wood, eerily similar to the noise described in the tale I had just read aloud. I forced myself to dismiss it as coincidence. The storm was raging. The windows rattled. The house groaned with age. Surely my mind was weaving illusions from the chaos. And so, with a trembling voice, I pressed on with the story. The hero, Ethelred, having broken through the hermit's door, found not the old man, but a monstrous dragon, scales glistening, tongue aflame, guarding a palace of gold. Upon the wall hung a shield of shining brass, inscribed with a promise, "He who slays the dragon shall win the prize." Ethelred raised his mace and struck. The beast fell, releasing a death cry so hideous, so piercing, that the champion was forced to cover his ears against the dreadful sound. And at that very instant, I heard it again. Not from the book, not from my imagination, but from the house itself. A long, harsh, unnatural scream, distant yet real, echoing through the halls. It was the dragon's shriek, alive in the walls of the Usher mansion. The second coincidence struck me like a blow. Wonder and terror warred within me, yet I forced myself to remain silent, unwilling to rouse Usher's fragile nerves. Still, I could not ignore the change that had overtaken him. Slowly, he had turned his chair to face the chamber door. His lips trembled with inaudible murmurs, his head drooped upon his chest, yet his eyes, wide, rigid, unblinking, betrayed that he was no sleeper. His body rocked gently, rhythmically, as though swayed by some inner current of dread. I tore my gaze away and pressed on with the tale of Sir Launcelot. The hero, having slain the dragon, now approached the brazen shield upon the silver floor. Before he could reach it, the shield fell with a mighty crash, ringing out across the castle. No sooner had the words left my lips than the sound itself filled the chamber, a hollow metallic reverberation, muffled yet distinct, as though a great shield of brass had indeed fallen upon a silver floor somewhere in the depths of the house. I leapt to my feet, shaken to the core. Usher, however, continued his slow, measured rocking, his eyes fixed, his face rigid as stone. I rushed to him, placed my hand upon his shoulder. His body shuddered violently, a sickly smile flickered across his lips, and he began to mutter in a low, hurried gibbering, as though unaware of my presence. Leaning close, I caught the dreadful meaning of his words, words that revealed the full horror of what he knew and what was about to come.
Not hear it? Yes, I have heard it. Long, long, long have I heard it. For minutes, for hours, for days, and I dared not speak. Oh, pity me, wretch that I am! We entombed her alive! Usher's voice rose to a shriek as he confessed. Did I not tell you my senses were sharpened beyond endurance? I heard her first faint stirrings in the coffin days ago. I heard her struggles, her cries, the tearing of her prison's hinges, the scraping of her hands against the copper vault, and now, tonight, the breaking of the hermit's door, the dragon's death cry, the clang of the shield. They are not in your book, but in this house.
They are hers, her coffin breaking, her voice shrieking, her steps upon the stair, her heart beating, louder, louder! Madman! He sprang to his feet, his eyes blazing with terror. Madman! She stands there, at the door! And as if his words had summoned her, the massive ebony doors swung open with a thunderous gust. There she stood, Lady Madeline, tall, shrouded, her white garments stained with blood, her frail body marked by the violence of her struggle. For a moment she swayed upon the threshold, then with a low, dreadful cry she fell forward upon her brother. In her final death throes, she dragged him down, lifeless, crushed beneath the terror he had so long awaited. I fled. From that chamber, from that house, I ran into the storm. The wind howled, the tempest raged, and as I crossed the ancient causeway, a wild light flared across my path. I turned. Behind me, the House of Usher loomed, its shadows vast and terrible. The blood-red moon shone through the great fissure that split the mansion from roof to foundation. Even as I watched, the crack widened, the whirlwind roared, the walls groaned and tore apart. With a sound like the voices of 1,000 waters, the House of Usher collapsed, and the dark tarn swallowed it whole.
And thus the story ended. If you liked this journey into the worlds of classic literature, do not forget to support us by subscribing so we can tell you more. And hey, if there's a classic tale you'd love to hear told in this suspenseful style, drop its name in the comments below. Your suggestion might be our next chilling adventure.